Hello. Oh, it's loud outside. Hello, hello. Oh, Bianca's here. That's quick. Hi, guys. For those who are coming in, you're joining in conversation with myself and Bianca. We're going to be talking
I'm
about
here.
the intersection of music and Black music and social justice movements. Bianca's coming in now. And I'm glad that you guys are here. Hey, Damon. Let's see. It also looks like my connection might be janky, which would be terrible if that's the case. Let's see. Hi. I'm waiting for Bianca to get in the room. Hold on 1 second, guys. Now, is this my connection or her connection? Hi, y'all. It looks like we might be having connection issues. Give me 1 second. Was she? I'm trying to get Bianca in. There we go. Hi.
I wasn't sure if my connection was bad, but we're here.
Somebody's connection was bad. I don't know if it was mine or yours.
Right. We're here. We made it.
We're here, but my Wi-Fi has apparently been doing weird things this week, so it's very possible it's mine.
I'll blame you.
Okay. You can blame me. I'll take the blame. So as we still have people coming in, I guess welcome, guys. We can give folks a little bit of a minute to kind of trickle in before we give an introduction.
Yeah.
For just a second, I guess we can do an official kickoff at maybe like 6:04, 6:05.
Yeah, I was gonna say 6:05.
Yeah, we'll do 6:05. Somebody said they're excited for this. Hi, I see our partners in this conversation, Our Music, My Body, and Amplify Her Voice are in the room. Welcome, you guys, and thank you because we're here. Yeah, hi, Sel. I see that you're here. We're gonna wait still for other people to come in. Hi, Nick. So while we're giving it another minute for those coming in, we're going to give it literally another minute for folks to come in. Bianca, did you realize that Thanksgiving is next week?
You know, I was actually speaking to my mom before I got on live, and she asked me like, what are the Thanksgiving plans? I'm like, ma'am, what plans?
Right.
So she actually reminded me that it's Thanksgiving next week. It doesn't feel like it at all, like the vibes
at all. And even though I knew I was staying home, I was in the grocery store like I think maybe Monday, and I saw all the stuff out, and I was like, oh, I can shop next week. And I was like, oh wait, it is next week. I don't know where November went. The year is over.
I want it to be over, but you know.
But not for those reasons. All right, it is 6:05. We're gonna go ahead and kick things off, but I'm actually gonna turn this over to Bianca to introduce our conversation and kind of let everybody know why we're here.
Yes. So for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for joining tonight. Tonight we're here thanks to Our Music, My Body, and also Amplify Her Voice. Their ongoing efforts to make local venues and live music more inclusive and make sure they have safe spaces for people who go to concerts and venues, you know, when it's safe to do so again. So after this, be sure to go to their page for more information on how you could kind of help keep this mission going, and also details for hashtag Save Our Stages for their efforts to keep music alive.
Right.
I miss concerts, and you know their efforts are important to me, so I'm hoping that you guys support.
I miss live concerts too, and I think that was one of, as somebody who works across both sides of the industry, journalism and talent, that was one of the main things. You know, COVID hit right at the beginning of festival season, and then going into summer concert season, and the idea of having to reimagine live music is something I don't think any of us ever really considered before. But in this climate is what our artists need. And I think that does kind of speak to what you and I are going to talk about tonight, which is like music's role in social justice movements.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I guess before we start, I should introduce who I am.
You should tell the people who you are.
Okay, so for those who may not know, I am Bianca Gracie. I am a freelance music editor. I tackle pop, hip hop, R&B, reggae, dancehall. Also cover movies, TVs, fashion. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. So
you call yourself is it a nostalgia addict, a nostalgia head, a nostalgia specialist?
Queen.
Nostalgia queen, right?
Yeah, I'm a huge lover and advocate for the late 90s, early 2000s. Like that's just like my zone. So I try to cover that as much as possible.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I'll introduce myself. I am Naima Cochrane. Tonight, the capacity that matters is that I'm a music and culture journalist. Like Bianca, I specialize in older catalog. My specialty is pretty much anything that came out before the digital age, so 2000 and before, and putting those things in context because I just think they get left out. I think the things that we can't immediately see in front of us get left out of the conversation a little too often. And I think this is a perfect example of where that comes into play. So tonight we were asked to, well, Bianca was asked to, and she brought me in, which I'm thankful for, to kind of talk a little bit about, just talk about what music's relationship to social justice movements looks like. But as you and I were talking and preparing, one of the things we thought was important, and if y'all are hearing noise in the background, it's Washington Heights being Washington Heights. Welcome. Consider it ambiance. I'm
in the Bronx, so I totally understand.
Same thing, right? Yeah. But to talk about what, and that might actually be sirens heading over to Columbia Presbyterian. They've been kind of active lately. But to talk about kind of the history, I think that people have either forgotten or maybe some younger music fans aren't really aware that, you know, musicians and performers being active in a social justice conversation or putting their art in a social justice conversation is not a new thing. It's existed as long as, you know, in some form or another, commercial music has existed, you know?
Exactly. And I think music, to me at least, and I mean, I'm sure you agree, music has always been political because music reflects people, reflects society, reflects what's going on in everyday life. So as much as, you know, I know some artists don't like to attribute themselves to politics, like it's just inherent and, you know, it's something that you can't get away from. And, you know, I think the earliest that I've, you know, experienced it and just with my, just like my music knowledge, I really love the music from the 60s and 70s. I'm a huge psychedelic, you know, rock, like that type of era. And and of course soul music as well during that time. And I think protest music was so alive during that era.
Yeah, I think, you know, and there's, if you're talking about the 50s, you're talking about the 60s and the 70s, we have two different types of protest music that we're talking about. So there was that what came out of the civil rights movement, right? And that was both, you know, regular music and even some spoken word, like the Gil Scott-Herons, the Last Poets, but also, you know, Nina Simone and even artists who didn't necessarily specialize in that genre, but who were active, like a Harry Belafonte, or, you know, so there were different ways in which people participated through their art. I think we all immediately think of Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," which was
an essential anthem for that.
Yeah, and it was literally one of the first soul concept albums. And he was inspired to write it when he found out about the massacre at Kent State. And so he realized that he wanted to tap into the social consciousness in a way that even Berry Gordy was like, oh no, we trying to do shiny over here. I don't really know if we trying to do all of that. And Marvin fought for it. And it was like this seminal work that you know, still lives and breathes and that people still draw on. And it wasn't even just about actual social justice at the time. It was about ecological justice. It was about, you know, like it reflected, it was about education. It was about, you know, it reflected a broader landscape of the moment, which is all still relevant, but it also started like a domino effect within Motown. Then you got the Temptations and then obviously Stevie, who's always been able to, you know, invoke whatever's going on. But even beyond that, you had the Isleys, you know, their original Fight the Power was about, you know, fighting the power. And I think we just have this whole gamut of work that we can look at that tells a story about what was going on at the time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of my favorite moments from the 70s, that it didn't really have to do with lyrics, actually. You know, when
Mm-hmm.
Jimi Hendrix performed at Woodstock and he used his guitar to perform Star Spangled Banner, which is, you know, so crucial in American history and, you know, within the fabric of our nation. But he used it as a form of protest. You know, it was on the back end of the Vietnam War, and he
Right.
used what we see as such a national anthem and turned it into a conversation through his guitar. So I think,
Right.
you know, I also enjoy when artists, you know, they go on big platforms, you know, like a Woodstock, and to evoke that message.
And that was the other kind of protest music that came out of the time, was the messaging that was anti-war, anti-violence, that went beyond just soul artists and soul music, and whether that was like folk music or, like you said, like Jimmy and the rock and roll and the entire counterculture. Um, you know, now sometimes you might only hear it in the space of, like, if you're watching a Vietnam era movie or if you're watching something from that time. But I think that it's the music is really poetic, and like you said, even just the way they play with sound, like with a Jimmy, to deconstruct things and maybe make it feel a little jarring, make it feel a little, you know, less than perfect, because that was reflecting what the country was like then.
Yeah.
I think is important.
Yeah. And I think, you know, as we progress, you know, from the 70s into the 80s, I think the music industry, you know, woke up a little bit and realized, you know, okay, we can use this music not just as a for profit, but also to spark change with these artists. You know, I think the Live Aid benefit concert in 1985 was such
Mm-hmm.
a monumental moment. You know, it spanned, you know, across, not even across the country, across continents. You know, they
Yeah.
had the concert in the UK simultaneously happening, the concert in Philly. You know, there's Sade, there's Queen,
Mm-hmm.
Bowie, Elton John, like all these prophetic figures, you know, trying to spark changes through their music, you know, to help the I believe it was the Ethiopian famine that they
Yeah,
were.
it was the famine, and
Yeah.
then we moved. So like we went from this moment of protest music, movement music in the 60s and 70s to a more kind of, in 80s fashion, you can say it was a more kind of like bigger produced, like kind of a little more on, with a little extra
very,
on it,
very 80s.
like,
Yeah. Very
yeah,
flashy.
mega super, like you got 50,000 artists, you know, contributing to these different causes. So like you said, there was Live Aid, which was a whole tour, but then we also had USA for, was it USA for Africa? Was that the name they went by, for We Are the World? I think so.
I believe so, yeah, yeah.
Which was, you know, orchestrated by Quincy Jones, by Quincy, Lionel Richie, and Michael Jackson. And when I go back now and I watch the We Are the World video, one of the things I'm really struck by, as somebody who's now been on the label side, every time I'm watching it, I'm like, yo, the logistics just to put these people in the same room
I
had to
can,
be
yeah.
insane.
I've always wondered how long it took for everybody to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And
Uh,
I have all those, there's so many
those
people
things,
in that room.
I think it might not have been as complicated as we think about it now from a current perspective, because it was Q and Lionel and Mike. My thought has always been that those were a lot of direct phone calls, right? And I
That's
think and I think that's what doesn't happen on the same level now. I feel like now it would be like teams calling teams, which would make everything much more complicated. But you look at the star power in that room. It's like, everybody come to Q studio this day, this time. These are your parts. We're gonna knock this shit out in one
yeah.
night. And then the fact that, you know, everybody was able to get their people to sign off on it too. Like, I don't know that we'll ever see anything like that again, just because, unfortunately, I don't think that label politics, and I think that some management teams won't allow for it
Oh,
too. Now it's like, well, what's the rev share and where's the money going and you know,
yeah.
we've made it too complicated.
Yeah.
We've made it. I did want to interject and say, in case we are missing comments in the live, there is a question box that you guys will see at the bottom of your screen, and if you have a question for us, feel free to like put it in the box and we'll get to it. Like we're going to do a little Q&A segment, so we'll get to it at that point. But even without the bigger overreach, because there was also like, do they know it's Christmas, which was another big one. But even on the Black side, for the first official celebrated MLK holiday, Dexter King was inspired by We Are the World, and he called up Curtis Blow, and he was like, I want to do like a younger, hipper version of that for the fact that my dad's birthday is finally a national holiday. Which, to rewind just a little bit, a different kind of movement music, I realized late last year, earlier this year, no, it might have been MLK Day this year, that I realized that a lot of people under maybe 35 don't realize that Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday is for MLK, and that it was part of the lobbying efforts to get the U.S. to recognize MLK as a national holiday.
I remember learning this for the first time, like a few months back. Yeah. It wasn't like a well-known thing.
Well, I think that's on us, and by us I mean Generation X, because for so many years it would be played in full, on the radio on MLK Day. And sometimes people would put the instrumental under MLK speeches, which I think WBLS in New York still does. But now most of what you hear is just people sing the chorus, right? So if you've never heard the whole song, and I also think it just doesn't occur to anybody to be like, yo, let me play this whole song for you. I think there was just an assumption, like you said, that people knew. For those of us who are old enough to remember that, I think there was just an assumption that everybody knows that. And it made me think like, oh, wait, why would they know that if they've never heard the whole song? But yeah, Stevie was, going back to activism, Stevie was a huge part of assisting Coretta Scott King with lobbying. They tried to put that bill up pretty much every year from either 69 or 70. King was killed in 68, 69 or 70. And it took until 1982 for it to finally become law. But Stevie was a big part of that, doing concerts and lending his efforts. But Happy Birthday was directly, the lyrics even say like, it doesn't make much sense. There should be a law against something about having a celebration for King's birthday. I can't remember exactly what. But yeah, so anyway, going forward, they wanted to just, when it was finally recognized as a national holiday, Dexter calls Curtis Blow, and he's like, how can we do something for my dad? So the video is at the King Center as it was then, and you have really kind of like a younger, hipper version of the We Are the World folks. You got Whitney, who actually wasn't there in person, but it was so nice to send a video in. You got Whitney, you got New Edition, you got the Fat Boys, you got Kool and the Gang, you got Curtis Blow himself. Who else? You got Stephanie Mills. You got
oh my goodness.
You got Menudo when Ricky Martin was still in Menudo. You got I think it's such a great time capsule, and great. And who else? I'm missing some people, but definitely go take a look. It's called Sing Celebrate. If you haven't,
check it out after this.
Yeah. Which then leads us into the 90s, right? So hip hop, I think some people might feel like hip hop artists just kind of started getting into the political field, with the exception of conscious rap, if you want to say that.
No,
but hip hop,
I don't like that assumption at all. I feel like, people, especially, with my generation, millennials, like I feel like our knowledge of hip hop only goes to a certain extent. And I feel like some people don't either acknowledge or recognize the importance of the basis of hip hop, which was storytelling and reflecting what was happening in the streets at the time. And
right.
So I think, were you going to start with like around
well,
the 80s?
I'm going to actually even go back to the late 70s, because as much as everybody knows hip hop was born in the Bronx, I want to make sure those who aren't from New York understand that hip hop wasn't just born in the Bronx. It was born out of the Bronx in the middle of like gang conflict that prevented people from even being able to really walk through the Bronx. And hip hop was, even though this wasn't its intention, what it became was a way for to create neutral ground in a really volatile zone, you know, where it was literally like you could do this block but not that block, you could go across this street but not that street, but it created neutral ground for the different members to be able to come together and interact. And there are some early b-boy crews that actually came out of those gangs at the time. So even in thinking about the era of gang violence, before we even get to the 90s, we look at, and I don't think we've ever seen anything like this again in hip hop, like self-destruction, right? Which was put together by KRS and BDP.
I think my friend Mark 106,
yeah, I saw Mark mention that. Yeah. And anybody, you know, at the time, it was unique at the time. And you know, we've had, after that, there's All in the Same Gang, which was about gang violence on the West Coast. But even if you go back and listen to it now, it's just so impactful. And it's just like, look at all these people, like, look at all these, like, I think it was even controversial then if you were hot and you weren't in it. Like, it was drama that LL wasn't in it. It was like, well, where were they? Why weren't they there?
Yeah.
But when you're younger than me, I'm gonna say that. But like for your generation, like is self-destruction something that you look at and you like, wow, that's really powerful? Or is it just like, okay, there's a video with a bunch of rappers in it?
Yeah, for me personally, I didn't look at that moment as something as powerful as you would have seen it, because I feel like, you know, Generation X, they were more closely tied with it. I always find it so interesting, like Generation X, like you're at the latter end of it and I'm at the earlier part of millennials, so like we're not that far apart in age, but just so fascinating to me that our perspectives are totally different just because of, you know, the generations that we grew up in. So I think for me, what was impactful, you know, I remember growing up was kind of, you know, NWA's Fuck the Police in the late 80s and Public Enemy's Fight the Power. I think those two songs were the moments that I recognize as most impactful. Like, you know, it happened a few years before I was born, but just in the consciousness of hip hop when I was growing up, those were the two pinnacles that people always went back to when talking about hip hop.
And Fight the Power was, if you're talking about us as Xers, Fight the Power was like Gen X's first real like protest song, right? And I think it also says something about the resonance of the song that, like when you put that song on today, you want to go march or hit somebody or I don't know, do something, turn the table, flip a table. Like it's still, it feels so urgent. Like the song feels so urgent. And also, I don't think we can even mention Fight the Power without obviously mentioning Do the Right Thing, which was damn near prophetic, considering the fact that it came out in the summer of 89. The summer of 89, that spring was the year that the Exonerated Five were accused of the Central Park rape. And that summer was when Yusuf Hawkins was killed. And, you know, the documentary on Yusuf was just recently on HBO earlier, like a few months ago. And so the fact that this movie had already been made in the can and was still so reflective of the experience, you know, of even just things that were happening over the course of that summer, the racial tension in New York that summer. And I also don't think, and the fact that like you could run, if you guys have not watched Do the Right Thing lately, watch it now. Spike could have made this movie last week. Real talk. Like legit.
That's so sad to say. It's just, you know,
it's so sad to say.
Almost 3 decades ago, and we're still experiencing these exact same issues. Like nothing really.
The exact same issues. And I mean, and I don't think there's a song that's ever been used in a movie more times than Fight the Power was used in Do the Right Thing. So it definitely it resonated with you and it made you feel something. It made you feel a sense of urgency. And I'm going to actually skip back a little bit because you talked about it being like 30 years later, we're still talking about the same thing. With so many of this music, of these songs that we're talking about, so much of this music that we're talking about, you play it now. It's the same thing. And even if we blur the line between music and let's say like comedy or spoken word a little bit, there's a joke that Richard Pryor has about Black people getting pulled over by police. It's from 1960 something. It might be early 70s
Mm-hmm.
when Pryor was doing like a little bit more political commentary, like in his Berkeley years. If you play that right now, we wouldn't joke about it now, but it applies right. Like it applies right now, from like how white people be like, oh, the officer is here to help, like that type of thing, to
Yeah,
black folks being scared to reach for their wallet. Like the whole thing, it's still resonant. It's still resonant right now. But so, and that's just it's a longer conversation to talk about how everything is still applicable, right? But so with hip hop, we have Do the Right Thing, we have Fight the Power, we have All in the Same. We have Fight the Power, we have Self Destruction, we have All in the Same Game, we have Fuck the Police, which I don't think anybody would have thought of. NWA being framed as a protest group, that's a relatively new thing.
Mm-hmm.
We knew they were powerful then, right?
I was always
but
that, because like even watching the biopic that came out a few years ago, like it didn't seem like they weren't protests.
No.
They were just talking about what they experienced and what they saw on the streets. It wasn't like an intentional thing, like let's march and all of that stuff. That wasn't their intention
at all. We did not. They weren't framed as a protest group. We knew they were a powerful group. I don't even think at the time, in real time, and there might be some folks who, are in my peer group who might slightly disagree. Like, I don't even think we realized how powerful a statement "fuck the police" was in real time, right? Like, again, because they were, teenagers in their early 20s, right? So I don't even think it was really occurring to us that somebody our age was doing something that could be like that big of a political statement.
Yeah.
But we knew that it resonated with us. I'll speak for me. I knew it resonated with me and my friends and with situations that I saw happening. It never occurred to me that it would be a resonant message that would grow with me into adulthood.
Yeah.
Right. Or that it might even be something that the adults that I knew who have been part of movements in the original civil rights era might have the same perspective, even if they would frame it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like that I think is the difference. And maybe there are some things that maybe you can only really go back and see in retrospect, like the impact that it made,
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting about that time, in the 80s and the 90s, they weren't making protest music for the sake of it. That this was their livelihood. They were talking about things that affected them and, when they got out the studio. But, looking now, and, we're in 2020, I feel like artists are now doing it more intentionally than they did back in the 80s and 90s, because it's such a bigger part of the conversation, because we have Instagram lives, we have Twitter conversations, and technology, I think, is exposing us to more issues that we have and more injustices. So artists are, even more forced to, come out and put out protest music right now.
Right. And that's the thing, as much as we want to talk about like the era of, let's say, like mafioso rap or the bling era where, we all just needed a little levity and wanted to get on the dance floor and lighten things up a little bit after the East Coast, West Coast bullshit, or, even coming forward into like the Southern movement. Like you look at Cast, and in this part, I want to push back on the idea that like you have to be like a conscious rapper and your lyrics have to be mad complex and you have to be doing all kinds of like extensive storytelling in your music for it to be movement music. That's not true. That's just not true. Sometimes it can be very simple. Sometimes the messaging can be very subtle. But you look at Cast, and even in their first album, they've grown so much, but it might not have been speaking to national issues. Maybe it was just something that was going on in Atlanta. Maybe it was just something that was going on in SWATs. Like you said, it could just even be reflective of their lived experience. Like the fact that
like Outkast bombed over Baghdad, they were just talking Atlanta. It wasn't like this is, it turned out to be a national anthem in rap music, personally, but they were just talking about what they saw on the street,
Exactly. Same thing with Goody Mob, or even going back to Outkast, Get Up, Get Out, and Get Something. That was like y'all knew so many people that were reflected in that song. I was like, this is your anthem right here. This
Yeah.
one, play that. Like keep that going, you know. But it's like that. We knew that story, and I think that's the other thing is that, you know, somewhere in hip hop along the way, even though hip hop is now both a youth culture and a older culture, hip hop is, you know, it's a 50-year-old genre now. We can't keep saying this is for kids, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I think people have forgotten that there were very young voices who were giving us really sophisticated messaging in their own way, right? Coming out of high school, you want to look at the native tongues, you know, and La, if you want to look at Organized Noise. I mean, Goody Mob's first album is magnificent, you know, in terms of pulling back layers and even just introducing us to things that were going on in places where we didn't live that we maybe didn't know about. And I think that's the same thing. You can even look at Juvie's album. Like, he's got a couple of narratives on there that are like, yo, I didn't really know how that's what was going on in Magnolia. You know, like it's, and people looked at it at the time as glorifying violence for some of these albums, but it was actually more like, it's like what Curtis Mayfield did for Harlem with across 110th Street, but we're doing it about, you know, the hood and the projects and the realities of being a hustler or whatever. It was still reflective, and it was still reflective for a reason. Like, it was like, this is what we're trying to get out of, this is what we're trying to be, or this is what we made it out of, and this is what, you know, what we want to tell you about our lives and about where we come from.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we keep saying that these things haven't changed, and, you know, the cycle of what's always
My bad, you're right, Bobby Womack. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. The cycles, you know, that we keep seeing happen and keeps reoccurring. And, you know, I also think it's different when it's being sung rather than when it's being rapped. You know, of course, rap has such this stigma of being violent and being quote unquote ghetto and having the, you know, the huge parental advisory sticker, you know,
right.
And when it's coming from a singer, I think it's more palatable. But
right.
I feel like, you know, rappers now, I mean, they've surpassed that. You know, I feel like they don't really care about the stigmas that are attached to it if they have to send a message. And I feel like, you know, the George Floyd protest that, you know, sparked June following his passing, his murder, I should say, in May, I think we saw just this onslaught of protest anthems coming out. I think my favorite from that time back in June was Lil Baby's A Bigger Picture. I think he did such a good job of speaking about what was happening in Atlanta, what was happening, you know, in, you know, the inner city youth across the country, but also what he had to deal with, you know, being a rapper, but also still being part of the marginalized community and being stereotyped. Despite him being such a star, he still has to face the same issues that you and I go through. So I thought that was a very poignant message for him, even being so young. Like, he just got it on point.
Right. And I think where we are now, it feels like there was a segment of time in the 2000s where, you know, we didn't see as much musical involvement in terms of reflecting social, you know, social justice or social injustices, or reflecting urgent needs out of the community, etc. And maybe that was because, you know, globally we didn't think we needed it the same way for a minute. I was actually part of a project that John Legend and the Roots did called Wake Up, that came out in 2010, I think. And it was a reimagining, a reinterpretation of a lot of classic movement songs. So like I Can't Write Left-Handed, I Wish I Knew How It Felt to Be Free, Wake Up Everybody. And even though it was really highly critically acclaimed, it was a sleeper. Like, a lot of people didn't even know it existed. And it was like this magnificent body of work. But, you know, we're 2 years into the first Black president. We hadn't even hit the midterm elections yet and lost Congress. I just think it was too early, right? I don't think people realized we needed it. I think it felt outdated to people. Like, there's no real reason for this right now.
Felt celebratory mode. Like, we didn't get back to that mindset.
So but then, you know, you fast forward, you know, a lot of people attribute the first kind of movement song of the modern era to Kendrick with, you know, All Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I would actually say, you know, in honor of verses coming up in a little while, that even Jeezy's My President is Black. Like, low
That
key,
was a movement.
is a movement. It's
Mhm.
a movement. You know, movement music just doesn't look one way. So I'm gonna ask you, I'm gonna let you lead on this part, Bianca. Like, so what does movement music look like now?
Yeah, I think it's more, I mean, not saying, you know, in the past it wasn't in your face, but I feel like artists are doing it even more intentionally, because I think some artists may feel that if they're not speaking up, the fans are going to call them out. They're going to look
Mm-hmm.
disingenuine. You know, I feel like, you know, even with this past election, people were calling their favorite artists out because they weren't explicitly stating who they were voting for, you know. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's more eyes on these artists to really push out messages and make sure that it's intentional. I think, you know, for aside from rap, I think in the pop world, you know, I'm a pop girl, so
Yeah.
I think Lady Gaga has been such a big presence in, you know, political activism. You know, I think her Super Bowl performance alone in 2017, you know, she really, you know, singing the national anthem, but also, you know, sending subtle messages to our LGBT community while Donald Trump was in power. I think that was
Mm.
very important. And, you know,
Well,
Biden.
I think, and not to interrupt you, but you brought up the Super Bowl. I think, and this is like, and was for me an unlikely place for it to come from. But even it feels like it was last year, but even this year with Jennifer Lopez at the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
Like kids in cages, switching up the American flag to the Puerto Rican flag. I mean, she threw those messages out there for her community in a way that I don't remember J Lo ever being like necessarily politically active. So I think like everybody realizes now that there's more at stake. Even if you're talking about Beyonce, how she's become more definitively Black and outspoken, you know, year over year in her own career.
Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
her Super Bowl performance, you know, I think it was 2016 when she did it with
With Bruno.
Bruno and Coldplay, even though it was
Yeah, was it
Coldplay.
16, 17? Yeah, it was Coldplay's joint.
But I think Beyonce and Bruno stole the show. But, you know, Beyonce, that was when she premiered
Formation.
Formation. Thank you.
Yeah.
And, you know, she was wearing the Black Panther inspired outfits and just really making a statement on a stage where it's highly Republican, very, you know, cisgender white male.
Yes.
You know, historically football is such a racist entity, and, you know, to have her come out in Black Panther gear, that was, it definitely, you know, stopped the world almost as much as her self-titled album.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Totally agreed. And I do think that's something that we're seeing a trend of, is that as artists are feeling more comfortable having been established in their careers, now it's like, okay, now I can take the risk. Like
Exactly.
I've established myself. And I think that some people misinterpret that as they're doing it now because it's trendy, but I think actually they're doing it now because they have the leverage to be able to say, this is the content I want to create now, and this is what I'm going to do without pushback from stakeholders, labels, or potentially losing fans.
Beyonce couldn't have done that. She had to wait until she was free from her, you know, her father / manager. You know, she was the head of her own image, her own company, her own brand. So she had the leeway to say whatever she wanted. So yeah, I agree with you. It takes a little while for artists to really get to a certain level for them to really say what they want to say without much backlash.
Right. Somebody asked, do we think movement music now is more reactive instead of proactive because it comes out only when things are relevant in the current news cycle? I'm gonna steal a quote from John Legend quoting Nina Simone, because he's the one who put it on my radar. But when Jay has asked questions about artists and music, he always goes to Nina, who once said, our artist's duty is to reflect the times. Music is supposed to be a reflection. So you can also absolutely write about, you know, you can be altruistic and hopeful and write about like an inspirational future when we get to some place. But I think music is by nature more reactive in terms of messaging, because you are looking at the world as it is and either calling out what's missing or talking about what's there. So
Exactly.
in terms of music as movement, I can understand why it looks reactive. I would push back on that word and just say it's more reflective, because this is how artists communicate, right? Like, this is how, they make their statements about whatever's going on. And to that end, I think we do sometimes put too much on them to make vocal statements that might not be their ministry. They might not be here to
Yeah.
actually like have discourse, right? In like a normal way, but this is how they can actually talk about, things that are going on. And sometimes people try too hard and it sounds forced. But I think that there are some artists who really get it right. But I did want to ask you your thoughts, Bianca, coming into this election campaign. I think what's interesting is that, some people were actually saying that it's silly of us to look to entertainers to even be involved in a political conversation at all. That it's, it's kind of like we're putting them on pedestals, etc. But as we've been discussing, it's not a new thing. It just feels different in the era of social media.
Yeah.
But but then when we're also combating against, like platinum plans and photo ops with the wrong, what we consider to be the harmful side. What's your thought on artists not just being vocal about things that are happening in the landscape, but directly endorsing, campaigning with, etc., with candidates and with their people?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's better that they vocalize, who they're supporting rather than, sitting on the sidelines, because these artists, especially in the pop and hip hop space, they have huge fan bases. So, a simple tweet could just cause a ripple effect,
Right.
And, just one example that comes to mind, I know Ariana Grande was a big advocate for Joe Biden. If she hadn't spoke out, I feel like a certain sector of a fan base probably wouldn't have registered to vote. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
I think the same thing with, and I can't believe
yeah.
I'm about to say this, but the same thing with Taylor Swift.
Oh,
I can't believe I said
try
that.
not to bring up her
Taylor,
name,
curse you for actually making me support you halfway, sort of, kind of, in a fraction of the way. But yeah, Taylor, especially considering that she, even though she's a pop artist, she still is a country music artist too. Like, speaking out against Trump was huge. It was massive.
Country is a very Republican endorsed genre, just historically. Like, you can't,
because it's white.
That's just how it is. So for her, endorsing a Democrat was a pretty big game changer, especially because she, like Ariana Grande, her fan base is massive. So I think it's best for them to speak out on these issues, because one, if they don't, they're gonna look crazy in the light. It's like, well, who do you vote for? Like, what's on? Like, me being a fan, I want to know, should I support this artist or not? I think politics has become 10 times more important, especially, with our generation, because of what we dealt with, what was left in 2016. So it's better for them, to speak out and so show up, show up to the polls. Even and yeah, I was gonna say, with protests, like, we saw artists out on the front lines,
What about the voices that are still missing? So, when we were preparing for tonight's conversations, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that we do still, even when we're looking to music and artists to contribute to the conversation for change, and somebody said they can't take these artists seriously. I understand how in some ways you can't. Like, I think my thing has always been, if the artist is centering themselves, that to me means you're looking for a moment, you're trying to ride a wave. And I think you can tell the difference in messaging between whether the artist is centering themselves and doing it for their own benefit, or whether this is really coming from a genuine place and they want to support, a cause, or they want to bring attention to an issue. If you want to throw back to super old school, we used to say to to whom much is given, much is required. Like, you have a
Yep.
platform, what's your responsibility with your platform, right? But that said, what we saw, like, with this latest wave of the Black Lives Matter movement this year, was there still being, and I think this speaks to the music space too, like, people who are left out of conversations. So, like, LGBTQ conversations, they usually come from women and white men, not Black men, right?
Exactly.
Or you know, we're still having a fight for trans equality. So do you have any thought about, like, do you see it changing? Do you think it can change on that scale?
It's hard to say because, I think with my writing, I try to highlight, the queer community as much as possible. But, even though, like, even within the LGBTQ space, the front face of it is a white, usually white gay men. I think
Yeah.
Black trans people, they are often left out of the conversation, despite them being the whole entire foundation of the movement.
Right.
They ones who started Stonewall. And I feel like, just as much as, us as Black women were caught in the shadows when it comes to conversations because we're overthrown by fellow Black men or white men, Black trans people are overthrown by their their white counterparts. So I think it's so embedded into the foundation, it's going to be hard for it to be overthrown and shaken. But I think, you know, it'll take time for it to change. I think we saw a little bit of change in over the summer where there was a huge a trans protest where thousands of people showed up at the Brooklyn Museum in support.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think moments like that are what we need more often. And as much as, artists support, politics, I think they also need to support, social politics,
Right.
really elevate the marginalized communities within their fan base.
Agreed. And I know we're running a little long on time. Again, if you guys have more questions, even as you're dropping them in the chat, you can also put them in the question box if you did ask something that you think we missed. But one thing that we skipped that I just wanted to go back to really quickly, and talking about all the different ways that music can support and reflect the times and support movements, is, you mentioned LGBTQ, and is the disco era. The whole, I don't know, but I'm going to assume, people who are in here with us may know this, but just to echo it, the reason that disco kind of had a marketing campaign launched against it, because that really was what it was, like, there was a concerted effort to kill the disco genre, was because it was a genre of music that was inclusive of literally everybody except white cis hetero men. It was a genre for Black and brown people and for LGBTQ people, and for just a space where you shared a dance floor, exorbitance and self-expression and creativity, and self-identity that didn't fit into any specific kind of box or title was encouraged. And it was threatening to the classic rock bros.
Like,
and
they feel threatened, they want to dismantle it immediately.
Yeah, like, they were mad, like, what you mean I gotta put on a suit to go out and pick up chicks? The fuck? Like, they were really upset about it, and literally, like, decided with one kind of, imagine what's my name, Alex Jones, as like a younger radio disc jockey who's decided that he's, got disco in his sights. That's really what happened. And legitimately, like, killed the genre. At least the name of the genre, disco, still exists. It's house, it's boogie, it's evolved into parts of EDM. So the bones were always still there, but it was one of the first space where openly queer artists felt comfortable, as performing artists and recording artists. So many songs that came out of the era have become anthems for the community. Like if you guys watch Pose, there was the episode where Pray Tell just kept playing Love Is the Message over and over and over again, which was like one of the first disco hits, you know? And so
I love those, by the way. It's
yeah,
season.
so good. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not always, sometimes it's more about the movement adopts the music than the music is put out for the movement. So I wanted to mention that. So what do we think is the future?
It's so hard to say. You know, I think we're moving in a positive way. I think the issues that we face over the summer with all the protests and with the election being front page news every time we look, I think now that, you know, Biden will be inducted in January,
Mm.
I think it's probably going to be a more positive atmosphere.
Right.
But it's so hard to say because I don't feel like, you know, despite, you know, having, you know, a Democrat in office, that's not just going to, and also.
Oh no, we have so
Black
much
president. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
we have so much more work to do. Yeah, I do think that maybe artists may feel like this is a safer, like it's a safer space to get into, addressing these issues and having these conversations in a real way. And I do feel like I've also seen some reflection of entertainers who want to engage in a conversation who haven't before, not because they were afraid, but because maybe it didn't impact them. So like, even for example, with Meek, maybe not so much in his music, but Meek Mill comes out of jail and he's working on prison reform and has like a whole, you know, philanthropic, you know, effort behind it. And, you know, organization behind it. And I think that we, as artists are getting older, period, I think it's part of coming of age and starting to realize even if things don't impact you directly, how you can lend yourself to it, how you can lend yourself to change, how you can help be part of the solution. Whereas there may be a certain point where you're like, like I think when people be like, I'm not really political, I sometimes want to chalk that up to youth. Like, you know, ASAP said that and then his ass got locked up abroad. So it's like, now how you feel? You know, it's like, it's kind of like, it's about just like lack of experience. You just haven't lived the experience yet. I am curious to see, I'm hoping that in art, period, where I you know, great moments of art and creation usually do come out of struggle and trauma, not to glorify struggle and trauma, but I feel like 2020, like if you think of 68, if you think of, you know, the year Martin Luther King died, the year Kennedy got shot, you know, the culmination of that era of the civil rights movement, the beginning of, you know, a new level of Black progress. 2020 rivals 68, I think, in terms of like what the year means in terms of changes in America. So I'm very curious to see what comes out of this period, insofar as like art and music is concerned. We have a question that I'm trying to find. Hold on. Okay. Do you think you can still? Okay. So the question was, do you think you can support an artist who isn't engaging with the current movement? And I'll answer that for me. I can support an artist who isn't engaging with the current movement. Like I said, it's not everybody's ministry. I can't really so much support an artist who is actively working against the movement. Those are two different things. I think it's really irresponsible and often dangerous too. Like we are in this era is technically considered the age of influence because of the prominence of digital media, which means that every voice is amplified more than we're used to it being amplified. So when people say, oh, it's just such and such, or oh, it's just Twitter, or oh, it's just Facebook, no, there's somebody somewhere who's watching that or listening to that and making a decision based on that, or who's going to repeat, you know, things they hear, or who's going to think that something's okay. Because so even Wayne's stupid ass taking a picture with Trump to me is dangerous. You know what I mean? So it's like, but so for me, yes, I can support somebody who removes themselves from the conversation unless they're vocal about everything else and not that. If you're just not that person who contributes to current dialogue, period, I'm not mad. If it's a glaring omission, I have questions. But if you're actively working against the movement, then nah, I can't. What about you, Bianca?
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Like I said, I don't expect all of my favorite artists to be extremely vocal and marching. And it's like people show their advocacy in different ways. You know, you don't always have to be super vocal about it. But I raise eyebrows when I see, you know, Ice Cube, you know, talking about, you know, wanted to work with Trump for his Black America campaign and not understand the repercussions that comes with that idea when you're talking to a president who is inherently racist, but you're quote unquote trying to make change that you know is not going to happen. You know, there's also, you know, Jay-Z. I know this is controversial, but Jay-Z's
The work with the NFL.
working with the NFL at the height of, you know, the backlash of, you know, with Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee and Jay-Z not understanding why there was backlash. So, you know, I don't forthright like and cancel them. It's just more I look at them in a different lens.
Oh, I cancel Cube, but not Jay-Z. Because I think Cube absolutely understands.
Yeah, no.
I think Cube understands exactly what he's doing.
He knew. Yeah. But with Jay-Z, I'm just like, well, you're in a different tax bracket. So I feel like the higher the tax bracket you are, the less down to earth, you know, down to the ground that you are. You know,
you have to make a concerted effort to stay connected.
So it's like, I think I've outgrown, you know, artists, like me looking at artists and wanting to see what they do and have that, you know, affect my life. You know, I'm past the stand-up phase. You know, as much as I joke and like I'm past the stand-up phase where I have to look at artists to answer my questions. So for my own opinions, but I do look at them and see like, okay, like I see how you're moving and I don't support that.
I think that's interesting. I had never thought of stand-up. And first of all, I want to say hi, Fadia. Hi, Christine. We see y'all. I had never thought of that aspect, looking to an artist to answer my questions. I was always thinking more like defending an artist regardless of what they say. But that makes sense too. Like at a certain level of stand-up, like, oh, if this person says it's okay, then it's okay. But I think that also speaks to why it's important for artists to be responsible, like, and we're going to get ready to wrap up in a second, but I look at Chance, right? And there have been a couple of different times where Chance has been, I really think he's been trying to figure out what he thinks his damn self, but he's been doing it in real time on the timeline.
Yeah. Wrap it up.
Yeah, and it's like, if people, because, you know, people know Chance's proximity to somebody who's actually been in the Obama campaign, because, you know, Chance can actually string some words together and they make sense. And because he is considered a brilliant talent in other levels of creativity.
He's a very artist. So.
Right. So because of those things, when he says something like that, it gives it weight. People aren't as quick to dismiss it as when somebody else might say it, right? Which is the other reason why I think like you have to be so careful, because it's not so much that you don't have time to like figure it out and kind of, or even like have your ideology evolve over time. But the great and terrible thing about the internet is that it's different when you're doing it in real time in front of the world than when you're like in your boy's living room trying to figure it out, y'all smoked out and just talking about it back and forth. Like it's a very different thing. And my disappointment in Chance was like, you have a wealth of people you can call and have this conversation with who can actually, you know, talk you through this in a real way. It's not that you don't, it's not for lack of like resource. So to me, that was even more irresponsible. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, definitely.
Like, how are you having these conversations when you, like, you know, you actually know better. I know you know better, you know, like that type of thing. But yeah, I do though. I try to give artists some grace because again, they're learning too, especially the younger ones. They're getting exposed for the first time, like you said. Like the first thing for them might have been like, let me get my money straight, let me get my art together, and now it's like, oh, let me look at what I can contribute. So yeah, I'm curious to see what comes in the future. We are gonna get ready to wrap up. are there any other questions that anybody wants to throw out before we wrap? I think we've gotten to everything, I believe. Or Bianca, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to do? That you wanted to share?
I think yeah, I think we're good. I think we
Yeah.
tackled everything. But yeah, like you, I think 2020 has just been such a traumatic year and a year of a new revolution. So I think the outcome of it that we're going to see in 2021 and beyond, you know, especially when the live music space opens up, is going to be dope to see, you know, how these artists interpret what has happened, you know, on a big stage.
I want to thank again Our Music, My Body, and I don't want to get the handle wrong for her voice. Amplify her voice. I was about to get the handle wrong. I didn't want to do that. For the Band Together conversations, please visit both of them to find out more about what they're doing to save live music. And this conversation in full, if you came on the end of it, will be, I think it's going to be on the Our Music, My Body page. I think they're going to be posted.
You guys missed it. Definitely support them and check them out. And support your local venues, as I know the economy is still struggling, but definitely support as much as you can.
With distancing.
Yeah.
With distancing. Yes, be safe about it. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for joining us. Bianca, thank you. This is the first time we actually had like a conversation.
I know. This has been a long time coming, so I'm glad that you already know I'm a big fan of you. So
same. Yeah. This is mutual love right here. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Good night.
Okay. Bye, guys.